Today we're going to talk about social noise reduction, what I sometimes kind of as a joke refer to as the quantum theory of social relationships. And what I really want to get down to here is to explain why, if you want to be a healthy human being, you should essentially have almost no friends. The fundamental premise is pretty clear. To achieve something that you value requires action. Every action requires time and resources. And we have been raised to believe, we have been brainwashed to accept so many things as being valuable to us without questioning them, that we've gotten to the point where pretty much everything around us is noise. It's meaningless, worthless. And of course, what one person finds valuable is not the same as what another person finds valuable, and so on. So there will, of course, be differences. Once people's value systems are perfectly aligned, the value sets of two different people will never look exactly the same. But it doesn't change the fact that most of the things that we people are exposed to today, and here we are talking about both objects and people, are meaningless at best, and in reality they actually destroy our lives because they end up clouding our ability to figure out what is truly valuable. They end up sometimes literally stealing our time and resources. Time and resources which should have been spent on doing all of the things that are truly meaningful and valuable to us. So this is absolutely not a joke. This is real. This is a real problem. And for the person who tries to realize the maximum degree of value in their own life, well, this kind of life, where all values are perfectly aligned, is simply not possible to live before we begin to identify all of the garbage around us that is clogging our system, that is clouding our minds. So that's one thing, learning to identify the noise. And the second thing is that we actually learn to do something about it. Now, it tends to be easier with objects, though still not necessarily that easy. With human beings, with relationships, on the other hand, it can be a bit more tricky. First, to identify that somebody else represents social noise in your life, that's hard enough in itself. And then afterwards, what to do about it, how to address it, how to communicate that to another person, how to make that relationship better or end it, either passively or actively. None of this is easy, but it is crucial, it is essential that we learn how to do it. Let's, for the sake of it, start with objects. It's good to start talking about toxic objects because most people tend to intuitively know what we're talking about here. Or at least everybody who's ever delved into the realms of essentialism, at least understand intuitively what I'm talking about here. All of the things that we fill into our lives that essentially undermine our ability to achieve our real values. It could be the food and the beverages you put into your body. Could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be your phone, your laptop, your television. Could be pornography, could be video games. Or all of the other things which do essentially nothing but erode away our time and our resources. All things that destroy our ability to engage rationally in the real world, or our brain's ability to regulate dopamine releases. Now, some of these things might be perfectly aligned with the rest of your values, but usually they are not. We tend to think they are because we've been raised to not ask these questions at all. We've all been raised to not think in terms of trade-offs. And therefore we just end up pursuing all of these things in the pursuit of satisfying immediate pleasure, fooling ourselves to believe that all of these things, that everything can be pursued at the same time. That one thing never truly undermines another, simply because we don't think, simply because we have never been trained to be aware that certain things are destroying our lives. If we were fully aware, meaning if we actually fully integrated this awareness, we wouldn't do any of these things. So something messes up our ability to integrate this. Something is reducing our ability to think in terms of real value, in terms of real meaning. And this exactly is the root of most of the mental and physical problems that especially young people face today. Now, exactly the same thing is the case with people. Exactly the same thing. Just like with objects, we simply surround ourselves with garbage in the form of human beings. Social noise, as I usually call it. Garbage in the sense that many of these people don't really pose any real value to us. And true, a given person might of course represent real value to somebody else. Remember, just like with objects, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? But people who take our time and resources, sometimes literally, as I mentioned earlier, if they're narcissists, psychopaths, etc., And the thing is, when we talk about human beings, social relationships, it usually strikes people as significantly less intuitive than if we are talking about objects. And now, why is this the case? Now, there are several reasons. One of them, of course, being that hundreds of thousands of years of evolution has left us with a tendency to ascribe utility to socializing for the sake of socializing. And if you add just a little bit of toxic upbringing to that cocktail, you get what we see today. Many people who are prepared to sacrifice essentially anything to not be left outside of the crowd. In terms of upbringing, probably the most significant factor is to be found in the way that educational institutions today are structured. Think about it. Almost from the moment you're born or a few months old, and from the first moment you set your feet in an institution of some sort, daycare, kindergarten, preschool, school, whatever, most of the social relationships you have are both involuntary and purposeless. Completely purposeless. Think about school. You are, as a child, forced, sometimes by the state, at least by your parents, to sit in one room with 20 to 30 other students the same age as yourself. Being taught, being trained by one adult, standing in one end of the room at the blackboard or the whiteboard, trying to get you to memorize a bunch of stuff in ways that actually don't serve any educational purpose whatsoever. Let's look at these relationships. First, the teacher. There's not much about the way that teaching takes place today, which efficiently or to any degree at all, actually serves the purpose of educating children. Forcing a group of children to look onto a board or to listen to one authority at the end of the room or to be looking into a book for 7 to 8 hours a day, having to ask for permission to eat, to go to the toilet, being bullied by other kids because, the institution has neither the will nor the resources to really create a healthy environment in between the children. The fact that anyone could ever think that this would turn out to be a great learning environment is extraordinary, to say the least. There is nothing about this type of teacher-student relationship which serves any true educational purpose. It is a meaningless, empty, hollow, superficial relationship. And even the teachers out there who want to do a good job, and there are many people out there who have both the will and the capacity to be great teachers and mentors for our children. Well, the structure of the modern educational institution simply won't allow them to do that. What about the other students then? Are those relationships not purposeful or meaningful? Well, they are purposeful to the same extent as your relationships with the other inmates of the prison are purposeful. You are thrown into a classroom with a bunch of other children that have the same age as you. And this might seem like it makes sense, but it doesn't. Because the thing is, there is actually not much innately practical about engaging in social relationships with other people of the same age as you. Of course, there is some logic to it when we talk about adults in terms of love relationships, reproduction, etc. But as a child, no, it doesn't really make much sense to spend a lot of time with children your own age. Think back 10,000 years. Relationships back then pretty much always served a purpose. The relationship that a young boy has with his father, his brothers, his mentors, his peers, the other people of the tribe are all extremely purposeful. There is nothing meaningless to be found in any of those relationships. Now, children back then were not thrown into different groups based on age per se. In a small community or in a small tribe, there would always be children of different ages, of different levels of capacity, playing with each other, learning from each other, again, across age groups. As I said, different ages, of course, means different levels of capacity, which means that older kids would be able to teach, mentor, and to some extent hold authority over the younger children. And this would be an integral part of childhood, a part of your development, as well as the development of your skills. That you would actually have to teach and demonstrate skills to younger members of your childhood group. And you would learn to take responsibility as part of that. Not because of some arbitrary hierarchical divisions, but because of real differences in capacity. Again, meaningful because it relates to the real world. Of course, the same way the other way around. Younger kids would constantly be around older kids. Kids with a higher capacity than them. And of course, this would help their learning. There's a reason why younger siblings statistically, on average, begin to speak earlier than their older siblings. Because they absorb vocabulary, they absorb language from listening to and communicating with their older siblings. All of this is taken out of the equation when you cram 25 equally clueless children of the same age into the same classroom and force them to all day look at and listen to a human being who serves no real purpose as neither teacher nor mentor. Not to mention that because our time with our parents, our primary caregivers, is so limited when we're kids, because we're primarily raised by all of these institutions, even the child-parent relationship becomes hardwired into our brains as being of lesser importance. The consequence of all of this is that we are indoctrinated from the earliest moments of our lives to believe that relationships do not really need to serve a purpose. Essentially, that social relations hold value just for the sake of being social relations. All of which results in only one thing: that we as adults forget that human interactions, just like everything else you come across in life, represents either something that hinders you or something that supports you on your way to achieve the things that are truly valuable to you. In other words, social relationships are not inherently valuable. Some people are meaningful in our lives and others aren't. But we were raised to not give this a thought, but rather, for instance, to think that friendships for the sake of friendships is something that is valuable. And I promise you, it isn't. The only things that are valuable to you are the things that are valuable to you. That's it. And most people in your life, in fact, undermine the things that are really valuable to you. Because most of the things that are really meaningful to us in our lives, they actually require quite a lot of time and resources. Now, you might come up with exceptions for this, but generally it will be the case that if something is easily obtainable, it tends to not be among the most valuable of things. Really meaningful things are costly to obtain and they are costly to maintain. And that is the reason why many social relationships in your life, for instance, the attempt to have many friends at the same time, will very likely wear you down and destroy you long term, physically and mentally, rather than benefit you. Because a really solid and well-functioning friendship cannot be bought cheaply. It requires time. And the time in our lives is a zero-sum game. Time spent one place cannot be spent another. I personally became aware of this several years ago. I was 16, 17, training to join the Naval Special Forces in Denmark, where I come from. And during those years, especially from when I was about 17 to 19, I really struggled with priorities, with how to structure my life and my energy. And one of my trainers, one of my mentors at the time, who was a former sergeant in the Special Forces and also a psychotherapist, he began to teach me about rooting out social relationships in my life, just as if I was clearing out my house or sweeping the floor from garbage. And he talked about it as something which releases energy. He explained to me that it's like an atom. It requires huge amounts of energy to hold together the particles of an atom. But the moment you split the atom, what happens? Extreme amounts of energy are released. And I remember that this almost immediately made complete sense to me. At that time of my life, I was constantly trying to achieve a number of different things which were essentially undermining one another. Studying, I went to high school at the time. Training to join the Special Forces, I trained 5-6 hours a day. Friends, a girlfriend, hobbies, etc. And all of these things were essentially me trying to live a contradiction, trying to eat the cake while saving it at the same time. And you might be able to do this for a long time before feeling the consequences. Because the nature of these things is that it deteriorates you slowly. It destroys you subconsciously, long before that destruction becomes clear to you or anybody else. I noticed it relatively quickly because I was training to join the Special Forces. Something which was so demanding that even small mistakes in planning and prioritization meant that my performance curve didn't look the way it was supposed to. Or its symptoms just showed themselves quickly because I became stressed, I couldn't sleep, my relationship with my girlfriend at the time went to pieces, etc. So I got the chance to witness my own destruction, the consequence of my own failure to reduce the noise in my own life. I got to see this play out, short-term, real-time. And that was when I began to engage actively in social noise reduction. It was more hesitant and clumsy at first, but over time I've gotten much more efficient at it. Simply to sit down and look at every single person, object, thing in my life and consider, how does this person, thing, whatever, fit into my overall value system? To what degree are any of these things truly essential, truly meaningful to me? Do any of these things serve my happiness at all? And if not, simply cutting it out of your life. With human beings, how you choose to do that, of course, depends entirely on the nature of that given relationship. I would suggest that if you look at a person and you assess that that person actually undermines your life happiness, and if that person actually at the same time wants to be with you, tries to be with you actively, that is, if it is difficult to get rid of the person, so to speak, I would suggest that you take a conversation with the person and tell them the truth. You do not make me happy. It does not fit into my value system to have you in my life. This is not an easy conversation to have. I have done it several times in my life, and since most of us are not psychopaths, this is genuinely uncomfortable, but it can be necessary. On the other hand, if the person is not actively pursuing time with you, that is, if they are not difficult to get rid of, and they are otherwise acting respectfully towards you, so you have no reason to attack them mentally, I would suggest that you in such a case passively end the relationship. Simply stop engaging with them. Stop accepting invites, calls, etc., and simply let the relationship die. And if they call you out for that, then you must take the active route and simply give them the reasons, tell them the truth. That's it. Now, doing this brings with it amazing consequences in your life. I can tell from my own experience that this releases insane amounts of energy. It means that you now have the unchallenged opportunity to really nurture the relationships that matter to you, which of course will only make those relationships flourish and become even better than before. Over time, practicing active social noise reduction will also give you an incredibly healthy and honest approach to the people around you. You stop pursuing social relationships just for the sake of social relations, but instead start surrounding yourselves with good human beings, with human beings that actually matter to you. And if you're not already doing that, you're going to be surprised about how much that actually changes your life. You practice bravery. As I said before, confronting other human beings like this can be a very tough experience. And especially because most of us have originally been raised to be social cowards. Because of our upbringing, most of us would, from childhood, much rather be part of a bad community than no community at all. But practicing social noise reduction will make you much braver. It's like learning to get rejected. Learning to reject, that is to kick people out of your life essentially. That is an equally valuable skill. And well, that social bravery can be translated into potential scenarios where the stakes are much higher or where the potential consequences are much more severe. So let me say this again. You should sit down, look at your life, look at every object, every human being, everything, every action, down to the smallest breath of air that you choose to take, and consider how this thing or how this person fits into the overall picture that is your life. And if it doesn't, get it out of there ASAP. After doing this for a while, you are going to end up with almost no friends. And it's going to be so great.